Good morning, Liz. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you this morning?
I'm good. I am super excited. I feel like I know this specific thing we're doing right now was
Mhm.
really came about a month ago, if that,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah.
I kind of feel like in ways it was 4 years in the making,
Mhm.
really, just like different
Right.
seeds. And this is just where
Mhm.
we landed finally
Yeah.
doing something about
Yeah.
it. I guess. So,
Yeah, I have vivid memories of the first time you spoke to me about chirp and wanting to create something concrete out of your life experiences. So this is really fun to see a new manifestation of how you want to deliver just experience and create community.
yes, I'm super excited. I and I'm sure people are like, "What is chirp?" We just said that, and I've actually had a few. So I announced this on my Instagram probably a week ago. I finally told people like, "Hey, this is coming,"
Mhm.
and a few people have said, "Is this chirp?" Because they knew I was working on that,
Yeah.
and I was like, "I do see how this can be confusing, but I will kind of tie together. This is not chirp, but definitely related." So I'm thinking maybe the best route is we'll do some intros. I'll kind of lead with my story, and then I think that will help people understand how you play such kind of a pivotal role in where this is going and why I
Okay.
need you here. So,
Yeah.
cool. um, and you know my story, so you just get to hear it all over again for
Ready.
the hundredth time. Um, so, I guess brief synopsis on loss. So, this community is the goal of it is to bring people together that have experienced loss. And that
Mhm.
loss can be, there's no loss to me that's worse than another, right? Like you lose a loved one, like it just sucks no matter how you lost them, who it was. Like it
Right.
is, you grieve after it. People are going to grieve a loss, and there's no timeline on that, just nothing. So it's really meant to meet people at any stage of healing. If you've experienced loss and you're living life after that, like that's who this is meant for.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, miscarriage, murder, just health issues, like anyone that you've lost that you are that you're still mourning,
Right.
um, to help them through that. So, my losses are a little over the top, I feel like, than most. So when I was 9, my dad was a police officer and he was shot and killed in the line of duty.
Mm.
Um, Not only did I experience it like in that stage of my life, but they actually didn't find the killer for 5 years, or I thought it was 7. I found an article that said 5. Who really knows at this point in my life?
Really,
But
yeah.
it was a long
It
time before.
wasn't solved in middle school, that's all I know.
It was not solved in middle school or even really high school. They had some of the names, but like didn't really have the
Yeah.
process. It was actually, the case was built because that took, they found it out and then they had to build a case before they took it to court and lost.
Mhm.
And I was in college and driving over to Tampa to go to some of the hearings and to go to all the sentencings, which is wild to me, right? Like I was almost 20 years old. This happened
Right.
when I was 9 and I was still reliving it. And, they're, hey, can you come speak at the sentencing? I'm like, what would you like me to say? Like, it's just,
Yeah.
it was wild to still be. It's not like I got to like close that chapter and move forward. Like it's
Right.
still going on. And the final arrest actually just happened last year. He was finally arrested and sentenced actually for something that wasn't even related to what happened, but he ended up getting a life sentence for it. So it was kind of like karma came around.
Sure.
I might do another, session on just like the whole story at some point if people are interested enough, for me to share it. But that's kind of the synopsis of my dad. And
Sure. And
then,
your first catastrophic loss at a very young age.
yeah. And I guess I can also kind of speak to like therapy at that point. Um, Looking back, and I have a ton of memory loss from the years before my dad. Like I feel like I've read so many things that like, after like 4 or 5 kids start to remember things. And I have very clips of memories from before my
Mhm.
dad died. Like I
Mhm.
don't have many like experiences I can tell you about. I don't remember a lot of things. But
Mhm.
I do remember shortly after they tried to get me, like I remember them sending me to the guidance counselor. We finally went back to school. And I remember sitting in there in like vivid memory. And I was just like, who is this person and why would I talk to her about my life? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know you. When I was
Mm-hmm.
9 years old and like, I don't know how to treat trauma, like how
Right.
to even talk about it. And then they sent me to, God, I wish I could remember the name of it now, but it was a summer camp. It was an overnight summer camp my brother and I
Mm-hmm.
went to. And it was for kids. I want to say their parents were lost in line of duty, but I could be wrong. I know everybody there had lost a parent.
Sure.
I can't remember how specific the loss had to be, but
Okay.
we went to that camp. I remember the camp as a whole. I remember like some crafts and stuff. I'm sure it did something maybe to help me. um, but it's also been interesting to see the different ways my brother and I have treated the situation, like healed over the years. Like my older brother, he's 14 months older than me. He does not talk about it. Him and I
Right.
don't even talk about it. Like we don't address it. Like I have always talked about it a lot. I think as I got older and the more I talked about it, the easier it was to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if that's just how I handle things or if those things when I was little, like when they planted and had me go to those camps and try to talk to those people, like if that did change something in me to where I was like, here, this is how
Right.
I need to deal with this. So
Yeah.
who knows? Who knows?
Probably a combination of both, right? Like your personality was drawn to that and you had insight. This isn't so bad. I feel a little bit better sharing.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody gave you some concept that it would be okay or permission, like you can talk about this when you're ready.
Yeah. And I think that's like one of the reasons I was so drawn to this idea of like creating like a safe community because
Mhm.
I also know it's not like I got on some big platform and said like, "Hey guys, my dad died. Here's how. Let me give you the deeds." It
Mm-mm.
was intimate conversations with people I was super close with that as I was like, "Hey, this trial's coming up," and my college roommate's sitting in there with me, and I'm just like crying reading these transcripts, and I'm like, "Hey, well, like, talking through it with her," but in that talking, realizing like I feel better now that I've said this out loud to someone like that. I'm not like internalizing this and just letting it run in my brain, and I can like converse with somebody about
Mhm.
what I'm experiencing, or they can even see it in a different light and like tell me how they feel about it. So it's like
Yeah.
it truly is that like you're not alone mentality. And I was like,
Right.
yeah, I'm alone in the loss, maybe, but
Mhm.
I'm not alone in, having to experience it, if that makes
Right.
sense. So
Mhm.
so that was number one. um, and then September 2020, I lost my baby brother, William. So he was 17, lost him to suicide. And my mom called. I remember like the night before, well, the night it happened. I honestly couldn't even tell you what day, but I know it's a Tuesday night. My mom called and was like, he's gone. He left. He left a note. He had a gun. A friend came and knocked on the door that he had sent a message to, which is what like triggered them. Like, oh my god, like this is what might be happening.
Yeah.
We ran out to find him. I had actually got in my car. I told Chris like briefly what was going on. I don't even know if words came out of my mouth. And I put stuff
Right.
in a bag and I was like, I'll be back. I got to go find him. And he was like, what?
Right.
You go find him? Like I'm in Orlando. He's in Jacksonville. I was like, I'm going to go find him.
Right.
And I start driving. I barely got out of the neighborhood. I'm calling my mom, calling my brother. I was calling William's phone. And then I called
Right.
Matthew and he picked up. And he was just like, he's breathing. And I was like, what do you
Oof.
mean he's breathing? And I was like, so you found him? He's like, yeah, he's breathing. And I was like, he's okay. So he's okay. And he's like,
Mhm.
yeah, he's breathing. I said, did he jump off something? Like what happened? He said he shot himself in the head. And I was like,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, what? And I couldn't breathe. And I remember
Right.
I U-turned in the middle. Oh God, thank God I didn't get in a car accident. I U-turned in the middle of this like road
Yeah.
that you should not be U-turning on, went back home and I just lost it. I was like, Chris, you got to drive. Like we got to
Right.
go.
I have to get there.
Yeah.
And
My
for
friend,
context, William and Matthew are also your brothers. So you have three
yes.
brothers. Yes.
Yes. Thanks
Just
for that.
yeah.
So I have an older brother, Andrew. He's 14 years
Right.
older than me. We have same mom, same dad.
14 months.
14 months to the day. He's older than me. And then after my dad died, I have two half brothers. So my stepdad, we all have the same mom, but Matthew and William have a different
Right.
dad.
And your brother Matthew found William.
Matthew found William,
Yeah.
which that's like also an amazing story in itself, like the whole situation, how it unfolded,
Sure.
which we'll get to also
Yeah.
later. But so yeah, Matthew found William. And what I ended up finding out probably 4 or 5 days later was I was actually the first one to know what happened to William next to Matthew.
Right.
So there was this weird like time lapse in phone calls. I happened to call Matthew when he could answer his phone.
Right.
And so he had found, he called 911. He, he's been a lifeguard, all those things, like Boy Scout. He knew what to do. Like he turned William on his side, William thrown up. He took his shirt off and tied it around William. Like he had done all these just like survival response things, right? Like immediate, like save mode.
Right.
And gives me goosebumps still.
Right.
Well, so when I had called him, he had already called 911 and had just William, I guess, like in his lap. But then when the cops got there, they took his phone because he was the only person with him. Like
I don't think I knew that detail, that his phone got taken.
They took his phone. So my parents, Jamie did know, my stepdad, he knew, I guess Matthew went there. And maybe Matthew like told him like, I'm at the park, he's here or something. So Jamie was on his way there because he was looking somewhere else. But the cops got there, they took Matthew's phone and they put him in the back of the cop car. And he was there for hours.
I remember that.
Yeah, he was, by the time
we got to
and we were sitting in the hospital waiting room, Matthew was still in the cop car. And he didn't have a phone. We couldn't contact him.
Oh my God.
Jamie's sister was there like waiting for him to get out so she could bring him up there and stuff. But like, so when I got to the hospital, my mom called me and she's like, she didn't know until he came out of the ER that he had shot himself. And she goes, my mom was like, he shot himself in the head. And I was like, I know. And it was days later when we were kind of like rehashing the details that I was like, when you told me that, like you had just found out. Yeah. And I was like, Matthew told me. She's like, how did Matthew tell you? I was like, because I called him and he answered the phone and he was with him.
Oh my gosh.
But he hadn't had the chance to call my mom yet when the cops got there.
Right.
So there was just like all these pieces of communication all over the place. So how she found out was, she found out like in the ER, right? Like what? They're rushing in and she knew something was wrong with him, but she wasn't really sure.
And you don't know what she knows or doesn't know. And you're all just in survival mode at this point. What's going to happen? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then it was, when I got there, so my stepdad's family lives in Jacksonville. So there were a few of them in the room too, in the waiting room. And it was like we were in like a room with the door. So it was like all of us there and there. Right. Chris and I walk in and my mom is just being interrogated basically. Not like violently, but just the police are just questioning like what happened, what was said, where did he go, and she like, I'm like, oh my God, like her son is back there. We don't even know if he's alive at this point. Like,
right.
Can we not?
Yeah.
So
what are the priorities right now? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, like my dad owned the gun, my stepdad. So he's sitting there thinking like, well, they're going to arrest me and they're going to take me out of here because it was my gun. And it was just, it was a lot for them to process. We walk in and we're just like, what is going on?
Right.
But then they come back and they're like, well, you can come back and see him. And I'm like, oh, so he's alive. Like we're thinking, okay, like he messed up. Right. Like, thank God, like he did it wrong. Maybe he fucked up his cheekbone. Like we're good, And so it was just a lot of different emotions. But yeah, it was probably a day before they actually pronounced him brain dead. And then they kept him, God, was it 2 or 3 more days? I really don't know. I want to say, so this all happened like on a Tuesday night. So I want to say it was Wednesday before they technically pronounced him brain dead. And it was Friday early morning, maybe like 2 a.m.
I was to say it was the middle of the night. It was like 2 or 3 a.m.
Yeah. It was very, very late when they took him back to do the organ transfer.
Yeah.
And that was really the only reason they like kept him going after he was really brain. They just wanted to preserve his organs. But it's this really weird thing, right? Like you're sitting there and like, this is someone you love and care about, and they're still look alive and he's breathing. Like, I know he's brain dead, but like
he has a heartbeat.
Yeah. And so it was almost like a form of torture, right? Like, well, until you guys go do this, I can't really leave his side. Like, I don't know. What if he wakes up? Like, you just have all these like, what ifs, or, and you don't want them to leave. Like,
no.
My whole goal was not to cry on this, but knowing that like when they took him out of the room, that would be the last time I saw him. Like, I never wanted to leave the room. It was so hard for me to like go eat. I didn't want to go sleep. And like so many friends, including you, had to come up to the hospital and everyone was checking on me and like, and my family, like, hey, here's food, and I mustered it up a few times to like walk out and actually eat something, but who knows? I probably ate 2 times in 4 days. Like, I just didn't care. I wasn't hungry. I didn't want to sleep, even though I knew I so desperately needed to, but I was so scared to leave the room.
Yeah. Your life was
Um,
moment to moment. What's gonna
yeah,
happen?
yeah, so, like, the first time my mom and I don't know, my mom maybe had been in and out, but so that morning, the night after it all happened and they moved him into the ICU, and mind you, this is like COVID times, right? So it's like, oh,
Ugh, I
2 people
know.
back there.
Yeah.
We
Mm-mm.
had angel staff there. Like they let anyone in there. Like, and if
Mhm.
there were 5 of us in there at one point, they were just like, yep, yep. They just, I think, like, read the situation so well, and they weren't
Yeah.
sitting there policing masks, policing people. They were just like, you have, this is the time for you guys to be with your family. Which was amazing. But so the first time I left the room, my mom and I went, they were like, well, we're going to do shift change. We have to like clean some stuff up, change the nurses out. They're just going to redo all this stuff. So if you guys like, oh no, I think they made us leave the room at that point. They were like, can go out for a while, whatever. So we were going to go out, eat our breakfast. Someone had have breakfast delivered for us, a friend of mine. And I remember the second we walked out of the room, we were like walking down the hallway and my mom was behind me and there was like alarms went off.
Mhm.
And it was like code red, maybe it was like code some, and I instantly knew. I was like, it's William. And I ran back and they had closed the door, but my mom was still in there. I think still in like the area. Like
Sure.
you're like locked out of the ICU area unless they like press a button.
Right.
And he coded like the
Oh,
second
yeah.
we walked
Code
out.
code blue. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yes, but my mom had not signed the DNR yet. So they resuscitated him. I don't even know if it's really that, but I truly think like it was at
Mm.
that point, like we had, spent the night like talking to William and like in the room with him. And the second we were gone, I feel like he was trying to hang on.
Yeah.
And
He
then
was
we
with
walked
you.
out and he was just like, okay, like I can relax or something. I don't.
Mhm.
And then it just boom,
Sure.
like it was the second we walked out of the room. And so I think I was so scared to leave the room because I was like, he's going to code if I leave. Like, what if he's going to be
Yeah.
okay and he's going to heal? Like, and then
Mm.
you're going through all this. So is he going to be a vegetable? Are we going to have to make a decision to like pull him off life support? Like, you're just going through like, what are we going to have to do here? Right.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to hold my shit together because I'm sitting here watching my mom grieve. I've seen the woman cry 2 times in my life, maybe, and I'm like,
Right.
if you're taking, it's not even just that you're taking in, it's the whole situation, the whole environment, like all of it. And it's just,
Right.
it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. So I didn't mean to get into that much detail here yet.
I think it matters. And
Uh, but yeah, so then I had to navigate forward. I had to move on with my life, right? Like I
yeah.
think I through therapy realized I used a lot of the um kind of just like the to-dos after.
Mhm.
Like, I dealt with the funeral stuff. I dealt with the cremation. Because I didn't want my mom to. Like,
Mhm.
you shouldn't have to do this for your kid,
Mhm.
right? Like, you just lost your son. You shouldn't have to fill out paperwork. You shouldn't have to go to a funeral home and pay for this. Like, you shouldn't this sucks. Like, you just need to grieve. But my mom and I are also very the same. So, like, she
Yeah.
probably would have liked me not taking it off her hands, but I was like, no, I'm doing this. I'm going to deal
Yeah.
with it because you shouldn't have to. I mean,
Yeah.
I drove up to Jacksonville the day the ashes were ready because I was like, I'm not sending my mom to pick those up.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't think it would bother me until it was sitting in my front seat. And I was like,
Yeah. Oof.
I'm not okay. Like, so
I hate this.
yeah. And I don't even think my mom knew what I was doing, but like I just walked in the
Yeah.
house and like set the bag. I didn't like address it. I was just like, how is work? Like, what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You're going through the motions. Like
yeah,
we have to check these things off. We are going to get this done.
yep. And it was a distraction for me, right? Like
Yeah.
it was something that took my mind and my emotion off of what happened.
Mm. Yeah.
And that is a big coping thing for me that I learned
Yeah.
through therapy is I distract.
Yeah.
When I'm going through something hard, I make myself busier.
Mhm.
Um, I hope no one takes that as like me starting this to make myself busier. I'm okay right now. But like in
What's
that
really going on?
yeah, planning his memorial,
Yeah.
like writing my speech for it, writing, making sure everybody knew, getting announcements, getting, like
Well, and I think that's a very relatable response to stress, whether that is loss, catastrophic, traumatic loss, or seasons of intense busyness that feels out of control. That's very human to say, what can I control? I am
Yeah.
going to focus on those things, because if I don't, I have no clue where my mind is going to go and what I'm going to feel. And so I do think there's some protective defense mechanisms there, where yours is very well like yours is just very well formed, where you're like, I know if I do these things, I'm going to make it through this next event or this next check on my to-do list
Mhm.
today, whatever that looks like. And I do
Yeah.
think that's relatable for a lot of people. And I also think that's the hardest part about grieving and healing, is how do you know when to start feeling? Like, how do you know when it's okay to stop doing so much and feel a little bit?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so hard for people because I look back at that time of my life and I'm so grateful for even like I'm a big believer in God's plan, like God's plan, God's timing.
Mhm.
It's the fact that I ran a business that ran itself, right? I had people that could step, I didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
I could take as long as I needed to grieve, right? As
Right.
I mean, I couldn't, I had young kids, I have young kids, and I couldn't check out of life, but like I didn't have to show up at a job 2 weeks later
Mhm.
or 2 days later, and I think a lot of people do. And even my parents, they were
Yeah.
like, I gotta go back to work. I'm like,
Right.
sit your ass at home and cry. That's what
Yeah.
you need to do. And I'm the one preaching that to them. And I'm
I
over
have a
here like,
plan for you.
my
You're
mom's
gonna
just
grieve.
yeah, my mom's like,
Yeah.
well, I can't just sit around this house and like, what am I gonna do? Like, there's just reminders. And I'm like, okay, but like, you're gonna let yourself feel that because
Right.
like you have to. And
Mhm.
it's it I hate that. I hate that we don't have a system for mental health that allows people to grieve, right? Like,
Mhm.
I won't even get into like maternity leave. Like, that's also some shit. But we give, people have babies and it's like, all right, leave it 6 weeks, maybe 12 if you're lucky. But like grief, you get 2 days. What
Oh,
if you
yeah,
had
no.
bereavement?
If you have bereavement, when my
Yeah,
husband lost his father, it was 0. Like, if you aren't gonna be here, use your PTO. It's like,
yeah.
there's
And
not
it's
like,
like, how can I perform for you as an employee
right?
when I can't even get my shit together? Like, my mind is everywhere but at this job right now, right? Like,
Yeah,
why do you want me here?
right.
Like I could not physically function. And I truly am just so grateful. Like, not only like the work situation, but like the group of people I have around me,
Yes.
our friends and our family. Like, when I tell you, it's just stepped in and felt like Chris and I were up at Jacksonville for I mean, I was up there definitely more than him, but it was off and on for 2 weeks pretty consistently that I just wasn't here.
Yeah.
And I don't wanna say I didn't think about my kids. I did. I miss them, but
Oh, for
I
sure.
didn't want them to see me.
Mhm.
I couldn't be the parent they needed,
Right.
like, in that season. Like,
Right.
I needed time to, like I needed to go to a hotel room and just be alone for 2 hours. Like,
Yeah.
I couldn't be making dinner and giving baths and doing that, like,
Yeah.
as much as I like distraction, right? Like, I was, like, too fragile to deal with that.
Right. Right.
And
And I was just saying, and you had children that were old enough to ask questions, and like,
yeah,
you needed time
yeah,
to heal and grieve the loss of your brother and all the things that you had been through.
yeah,
And it is truly remarkable, the community you have globally, like, here in a platform where it's virtual, but
yeah.
also locally. I mean, the number of people, like the rotations of like aunties and babysitters and food. And I mean, I know.
It was yeah, like, I have a group of friends here, it's, like, 5 girls, and we do our best to, like, get together once a month, like, just us, but, like, that group, I remember they just I don't even think I asked, like, they showed up at my house, they took care of
Yeah.
my kids, they stocked our fridge, they, like
I was
I
just
didn't
gonna say, I
worry.
remember you being like, "How are there groceries in my fridge?" Like, "Liz, they stocked my fridge." And I'm like, "Sign me up for that friendship plan." That
Yeah,
is
right? Like, to have people, like, show up for you like that, and I feel like I always see these things that are like, "Oh, you find out who, like, your true friends are in the darkest moments," and, like but it's always so negatively, like, "Oh, the people you thought would be there," like
mm,
and I'm like, "No, that's never been the people I thought" like, if you were to ask me, like, "Who would be there if you went through this?" All those people have always showed up for me.
Yeah.
when I have gone through it, you know? So it's like creating that circle, like how to find those people. And that's what another thing I want this community to be for. Like, if you don't have that, like, let's find it for you. Like,
Yeah.
how do we pick better friends? How do we pick, you
Truly.
know, the people in our lives that are going to be there when something catastrophic happens?
Yeah.
Um, and it's, yeah, I mean, I don't know what I would have done in that season without that. And I did bring Kenzie to this day still asks questions, but I did bring her up to the candlelight vigil that his
Right.
school did. All the kids from Stanton started a candlelight vigil, and it was so amazing. I can't even tell you how many, there were hundreds of people there, right? Like
Hundreds,
hundreds.
hundreds. You could just see people and candles for
It was
it was a lot of
beautiful.
people.
It was amazing. And like
Yeah.
to sit there and listen to the stories about how like William was like that person for them that like supported them through dark times, and like, hey, he talked me out of suicide. Like 3 people.
Yeah.
I'm like,
At least, yeah.
what? And so then you get all these questions like, okay, so did you give him the idea? Like, did you just start thinking like, okay, like how,
Sure.
so he was sitting here helping you, but like who was helping him, right? And I think that's where a lot of people in a dark space are. Like, they're somebody who helps other people and they have
Yeah.
nobody, you know,
Right.
like they're just pouring themselves and nobody's filling them back up.
Right. Or they
And I
haven't
just,
found a way to articulate, I'm not okay right now.
yeah,
And I think there's still so much stigma and fear around saying, like, I don't know how I'm doing, or I'm not doing well. Like, I'm not good in this season. And I think all the things you mentioned, especially as adults, when your work doesn't necessarily create space for us to be human, right? Where you can't take time off, or if you take time off, then it means, oh, I couldn't take time off for something else in the future. I think there's so many factors that limit our ability to be vulnerable about
yeah.
how we're doing with people that we do love. And I say adults because I think that's who our audience is here. But I know for William, that was his experience in high school as someone who was an achiever, an athlete. This, I mean, for all intents and purposes, like who people wanted to be. Like everyone loved him. He was a light. And I mean, then you think, who was his support system, or was he even able to articulate how he felt? Was the way that he nurtured other people nurturing to him in some ways?
Yeah. And it's, yeah, did he even realize he needed help? You know, like, did he know, like, it's not, you know, you shouldn't feel that way. You definitely shouldn't feel that way alone.
Right.
So,
I don't
and
know.
that's, I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think that's what I love so much about your mission is really like the
Mhm.
preventative of it all. So like, it doesn't get that far. Right. But
Right.
I'll let you speak to that, not me speak to that. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so there's a little bit, and by a little bit, I mean, you know, probably a half hour. We just talked on my loss.
Yeah.
I'm just skimming the surface. Um, but I think so the path to like where we are now, I think really started in 2020.
Right.
Um, I actually over COVID had gone down like the scary rabbit, you know, a lot of stuff started to pop up on like social media about like conspiracy theories and all of that. But I went down the trafficking rabbit hole of child
Oh.
trafficking and
Oof.
learning about that world. And I was just
Right.
like, what? Like, this is not okay. Like, how, I think maybe one of my like not so great traits is like every time there's something wrong, I think I need to be the one to fix it. And I can't fix everything. But you know,
What?
it did lead me enough to be like, how can I, like, this is something I'm so passionate about. Like, what can I do can I do anything to not fix this, but like at least be part of the solution, right? Instead of just,
Right.
you know, reposting memes about trafficking, like, hey,
Yeah.
here's the stats, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so that's how I ended up creating Chirp. And it was originally meant to be for therapy for kids who had been trafficked. Or experience sexual abuse, anything in that fashion to
Sure.
overcome it.
Right.
It was, so I created that and it was intended, you know, for the traffic therapy, but I met with 2 really good connections that have run nonprofits. And one of them, he kind of steered me into making it a foundation instead of like the clinical route. Cause I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, hey, we're gonna have a building, we're gonna have all these therapists in it and blah, blah, blah. Like I'm
Yeah.
all in, right? And he's like,
Yeah.
we're gonna step back and we're gonna start here. And just kind of was like, here's how you can make the biggest effect the
Mhm.
quickest. He was like, if you just kind of make yourself the bridge, right? Bridge the gap between the lack of money for these resources and the
Right.
resource. So
Yes.
I was like, okay, we'll start as a foundation. If it grows to something else, great.
Yeah.
If not, you know what? I'm still helping people. So it was essentially I would do the fundraising, I would get the money, and then I would find some therapists or practices to partner with. I would give them the money or some sort of way that I would give. I don't, we'd even address, giving it to the families. He's like, well, how do you go about that? How do you pick a family? How are they applying?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, I'm going to give it to the therapist and say, you pick who you want to, help
Right.
financially.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Scholarship.
yeah. And so like, I called you. You're one of my first phone calls about this, because clearly I know what you do for a living. And I'm like, hey, can we make this work? Like, will you sit on the board? Like, of course, you're a freaking amazing human and you are a professor at JU and you're running a business. You were opening a business at the time. I feel like you were kind of in the middle of
I
this,
was, yeah, I had just, yeah.
started
I
it.
had just
Yeah.
stepped
And I'm
out
like,
on my
hey,
own.
can I add this to your plate? And you were like,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. My
I
plate's
can,
huge.
let's,
Let's
let's
go.
do it. I've got this spot. It's my Jenn spot.
It's my Jenn pot. You're like, I always know when you call, it's either going to be like trauma or health.
Yeah. So, no, it's most of the time it's something fun.
It's fun with the trauma and the health,
Yeah.
right?
Fun and a little bit of trauma. No, or I'm having another baby. Like so many fun things.
Oh goodness. Um, but okay, sorry, off track. But one of the issues we had addressed in that I was kind of asking you, like, how do we fill this void, right? And
Yeah.
it was you were kind of giving me those stats. I'll let you kind of tell people like how therapy works, like, and what's really approved and how it just doesn't,
Mhm.
it's not enough,
Yeah.
right?
Sure. So when we think about health insurance, what most people are paying for covers what is traditionally considered medical care. And so most insurance companies carve out mental health or behavioral health. And so they actually fund it through what's called a carve out. So it's a different plan. Um, I'm a big advocate for all healthcare being in the same category because there's not this magical division between our brain and our body. It actually is connected to our entire body and runs our entire body. So it's like unfortunate that this is where we are. There have been some improvements. So some health insurers are very integrated and now view mental health care as a standard service, but there are many that still do not. And so what that means is some individuals may have minimal, if any, coverage. So you may think, I have amazing insurance. I have Florida Blue, I have Aetna, I have United. But then you may schedule an appointment with a healthcare provider who provides mental health care. So LCSW, LMHC, psychologist, psychiatrist, psychiatric nurse practitioner. There are a lot of us. And find out that it only covers 8 sessions, or maybe your copay is much higher than your other services. So if you went to primary care, maybe you pay a $15, $20 copay. Then you want to go to a mental health service and your copay is like $45 to $60. So there's these discrepancies that exist that are barriers to people accessing care. And then you flip the script. As a healthcare provider, somebody who could say, I want to take this insurance, we don't get reimbursed equitably and or at a rate that is very meaningful to run a business. And so I think there's a lot of frustration and disappointment in this disconnect because individuals want to provide healthcare. So like we as psychiatric providers, mental health care providers want to see people. That's what we do for a living. But then taking insurance at times, you're talking a reimbursement of, I'm just going to use some numbers that I've heard from plans. For an hour visit, they may want to reimburse you $70. So that's really challenging when you could take cash and or do a fee for service and take $150 for an hour. You're almost talking a 50% change or more. And those numbers are variable depending on what you negotiate, and you can negotiate higher rates. But all of those details matter. And those are the things that we as consumers need to be mindful of what we advocate for when we look at political policies and what impacts healthcare, because that's why something like CHIRP, a nonprofit that says, hey, we want to make this affordable for both, for the providers to provide the care and individuals to access it. Because again, on both sides, there are deficiencies. And so then you see large organizations taking insurance, which is great. But then they have the bottom line. And so they might say, these are the types of services you're allowed to provide.
Yeah.
And therapy is typically a service that takes more time. So,
Yep.
they'll incentivize different things. And so it's probably more details than anyone wanted to hear about health insurance and money, but
Awesome. I mean,
it's so
things we
important.
would never know, right?
And things I never knew until I was seeing patients. And then, sitting in a budget meeting and you're like, why do I have to sit in a budget meeting? And then they're explaining this to you and I'm like, what?
Yeah. I mean, you have a business to run and like there's such a shortage, right? Like
Yeah.
we were talking a little more offline and I was saying, if I feel like I need therapy, I need to talk to my therapist this week. Like usually it's at least 2 weeks before I can see her, right? And it's such a personal thing. You're
Yeah.
connected to that person. It's not like you need to see a therapist. You need to see the therapist that already knows your story, knows where you're at, and can meet you there and move you forward.
Yes.
So
And build that relationship over time.
Yeah. It's a time thing and you have to be able to afford to run a business, but then also like give your personal time and you only have so much of it, right? Say you even work an 8-hour day, like you can't see 8 patients, like you got to eat and pee. So let's say you 7, which just seems outrageous to me. 7 hours of just like counseling a day. There's still capacity, right? You can't see an unlimited amount of people.
Right. And I think, and maybe we'll speak to this more in other episodes, but defining like, what do we mean when we say therapy and why is that such a huge part of what we're advocating for when we think about individuals navigating life after loss? Because yes, friends, family, and community matter. You need both friends, family, community, and a professional guide. And that doesn't mean that we're saying every single person needs therapy, but there are some specific, I mean, I genuinely believe the world would be a different place if we all were exposed to therapy at a young
Everyone
age.
can use some self-awareness, right?
Yes, self-awareness, insight, and skills. And so, anyways, I do think that's valuable because I think that helps dismantle the stigma. When people realize, no, therapy is when you build a relationship with someone and they know you and they are neutral. They're literally getting paid to think for you, think with you, advocate for you in your own life, and then give you options. Hey, based on what I'm learning and based on what you said you wanted, what would you like to do with this? And it's really fun and it's really profound how the process works. And I've been practicing as a psychiatric nurse practitioner for 10 years now, which is insane to me that I can.
That's impossible because we're not that old.
I know, we're only like 25. Honestly,
if you add the years you probably had to counsel me in like high school, you're going on a solid 20.
So anyways, I say that to say there's some of this that when I was going through my training, I was like, okay, sure. Like you hear theories and you're like, interesting. And then you live it as a provider. And so, I've had the privilege of practicing in a variety of settings in the inpatient pediatric unit here in Jacksonville at Wolfson, and then outpatient in a variety of settings. And now I get to work for myself in the outpatient setting. And one of the most profound things that I've experienced is the privilege that parents, number one, trust me with their children. And then number two, that I have patients who graduate from therapy. They're great. They're off living their life. And then something might bubble up and they come back, like to your point, like it's your person. And I've had that happen a few times in the past 2 years where I'm like, this stuff is real. Like, I believe it, but then I experience it. And then it's a next level of the meaning that it holds for me as a provider and the amount of advocacy I want to do for, not only people who might choose to go into this profession and be a mental health care provider, but for the general public to just understand we're normal people who just have a lens with which we're going to listen. And we really genuinely do care about what you want to care about.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. And yeah, I feel like it's so important. Like I know we're both on the same page about that. But that's what's so heartbreaking is the amount of people that can truly afford or access the amount of therapy they need, right? So even if it's gotten better and they can come 6 times or 12 times or 20 times,
right,
then they have to come back and it's like, all right, well, do they have the $200 to go back to?
Right.
Maybe not, especially youth, right? Their parents are paying for that.
Right.
And are their parents, taking it seriously enough that they need to pay for it? Anyways, that's, I'm sure a chapter in another book, but using kind of that info and the structure of the foundation, like my goal was to just have the starfish mentality with church.
Yeah. Right.
And for anyone who hasn't heard the story, it's like there's thousands of starfish on the beach, and this man is just throwing them back one by one. And someone approached him and was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm putting the starfish back in the water. And he's like, well, there's thousands. Like, you'll never get them all in there. It won't matter. And there's another one. He says it mattered to that one.
Right.
And, we may not be able to give 10,000 kids 6 sessions, but if I can give 1,000 kids all the therapy that they could ever need, I think that I accomplished something there. Like
for sure,
we change the world. 500. Stuff like I'm going to shoot for the moon, but I want to give full help to somebody, not a piece of help to somebody.
Right.
So that was really the goal with it. As you knew, and I spent months trying to build that, like alongside running the gym, and I researched therapists in the area, figured I'd start locally just because I had to start somewhere. I hammered them with calls and emails for a few weeks. And finally, I think it was actually on the same day, like 3 of them responded. And I was like, was my shit sitting in the outbox? And like everyone just got, anyway.
Yeah.
I was so excited. I was like, these people are going to talk to me. Like, they're going to hear me out. Like, this is going to be great. We're going to partner. Like, they were all in. And I also know they're busy. So I was just like, so like honored that they would like give somebody they didn't even know their time to like, do something.
They want to know what I'm doing.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, we're going to collaborate. I had these meetings set, and they were set for Wednesday, and Tuesday night is when my mom called about William. And it's like, what timing? Like, holy, like, okay, God was like, this is not the course. Like, we're going to put a plug in that, right? And so I obviously canceled those meetings. But the thing was, I also never reset them. I still have them in my inbox. I still have their replies there. I still have the cancellations. I still have them coming back and being like, totally get it. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah.
I've never said another word to them in 4 years.
Right.
And three and a half, whatever. So it was just, I went through, and I remember talking to my therapist about it at one point. I was just like, I was like, I think maybe where I want this to go has changed. Like, do I want it to be for like youth who's suicidal instead of like, I think maybe that's where that calling might be for me now, because it's so personal to me.
Right.
But then I was like, that also doesn't sit, like, is it just suicidal? Like, they're not the only ones that need help. And I think I get myself into this bubble of like, how can I help the most? Like as much as I want to do the most for one person, I'm like, okay, but I also don't want to like close that lens and only help these people. I'm like, can I help all these people get there?
Right.
And so it's kind of trying to find that vehicle, right? Like, how are we going to do that? And it wasn't even that like my passion had changed. Like, I think I just kind of lost it for a little while. Like, I didn't have the drive to go do something. Like, I needed time to grieve and to get back to a place where like I was me again before I could learn help other people. Right.
Right.
So, I think the only thing that really got me through like that stage was my friends rallying around me, my family. They checked on me. They checked on my mom. They checked on my little brother. I mean, they were best friends, Matthew and William. And like, he was going through some shit too, but he's not on, again, like we addressed, like I'm very vocal about what happened. And not everybody's like that. My family's not even like that. Like, yeah, they'll talk to you about it. Like his friends know what happened, but like, it's like, if people don't have a reminder, they might not be reaching out to him. And he experienced that loss of it. I mean, the most traumatically, I mean, nightmares. Like, he was the one to see, he was that type thing. I mean, there's more in the story. Like, he didn't even want to go to the hospital at first. He just thought, he's like, no, I'm not going to go up there. And I was like, Matthew, you need to come up here. Like, you have to come with me. Like, I'm taking you because you're going to regret this in 5 years if you don't go. But it was just like his mind blocking out what had even happened. Like, he had told me later, he's like, I didn't even realize, like, he looked fine to me. And my therapist had actually explained, she's like, we do the, like, in a trauma situation, she's like, he probably didn't notice, like, he knew he shot himself, but he didn't think his head was swollen. It probably already was, like just those things of where she's like, no, what he is going to, his brain protecting himself of like, I can't show you this image again. So I'm going to portray this image a different way. Um, and I was just like, yeah, because the brain's a powerful thing, right? Like it has a way of like reducing
Right.
our pain,
Absolutely.
blocking us out so we don't feel. In that stage, it was just how people showed up for me. And I just so vividly remembered that. And like I put anniversaries for real sad shit in my phone. Like I have like so and so's mom died. So like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, birthdays are great, right? They are. But like everyone
Yes.
acknowledges you on your birthday. People, cool, show up on people's birthdays. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but like they need you a lot more on the anniversary of the death that they feel
Yeah.
like somebody forgot than they need
Yeah.
you on their birthday. You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I would even beg to say those things don't matter as much to somebody who's been through something like that. Like
Hmm.
the, like, yeah, it's my birthday, celebrate me. They're like, yeah, but I'd rather you acknowledge that like I lost somebody and I'm still feeling that 5, 10, 20 years later. Um, so and I know like my shit was so next level
Yeah.
traumatic that but like on the good side of that, so every single time my dad's anniversary comes up, I get a text from the lead detective, the head of police. Like, it's comforting because I know he's not forgotten, right? And it's on me to reach out really to my aunt and grandma. I don't know if anyone reaches out to them. I don't know who that person is for them. So I'm going to be that person. And maybe they do have other people that reach out, but I do.
Yeah.
I feel like the most painful part of loss is to live in that memory of them alone. And even like I know every single person in my family knows it's William's birthday, knows it's William's anniversary. I know that they're thinking it and they may not say it out loud. And it's you don't really have to address it with someone, but like
Yeah.
I'm not just gonna let that day go without like calling my mom or my dad because even if they remember, like they might not acknowledge it, but to have it acknowledged, because if it's
Right.
not, I truly think you're
Yeah.
sitting there and think nobody else remembered. And it's just because they didn't know how to vocalize it or they might not have known what to say, but like
Yeah.
you feel like no one else remembered. Um, so I guess I just don't feel like I was put on this earth to experience the trauma that
Right.
I have without a purpose, right? Like God put me through it and equipped me with the tools and the knowledge and the network and maybe the personality, but to get through it. And I said, hey, I gave you this trial followed by this drive because you need to use that to help others through it because there's other
Yeah.
people that aren't going to make it. And so really it combines my love for
Yeah.
business, my call serve in this very specific and personal way. Which is really just,
Yeah.
a dream come true for me. Like it could grow to 1 million people, it could
Yeah.
grow to 5 people, but like if I
Yeah.
help one, it was worth it, right? Like it was totally worth it. So I think that's how this kind of came about. And then I also looked at a double-edged sword. Like if this does grow and this can financially also turn around, donate to Chirp, and then we can use that to get therapy. Like what a win, right? Like we just
Right.
helped people on this platform. Then we
100%.
turned around and helped kids coming into the next generation, getting therapy or whatever they need, or somebody else going through loss that can't afford the professional help they might need. Um, it's like the ultimate trifecta, right? Like just winning everywhere. So, um, but yeah, I can kind of just provide this tribe that I've had to more people, like no matter what phase of healing or
Yes.
grieving that they're in.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. Everyone has that rush when it first happens, but it just passes and it fades, and then they just really sit in that alone. And I think if we can up just get rid of that stigma, create a place where everybody has gone through something and they show up in this space where they know
Yes.
they're not alone, that it could just be so beneficial. Um, and then really like in comes you to the story, right? Like you've been there every single time I faced a tragic event in my life. Like you've been a rock for me in so many ways. Of course, personally, but also like really in the aftermath and sharing William's story, I started to get messages from a lot of people that either needed help themselves or for like an immediate family member. And I'm like, okay, I'm cool out here sharing this story, but now people are kind of like, hey, I need help. And I'm like, oh, I'm not licensed. Like I can't help you. Like what? I don't know how. If I could have stopped it, William would still be alive. So I'm just kind of like, what are you coming to me for? And so, I mean, I've texted you 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, hey, this person's I think it was like someone's nephew, and I was like, they're suicidal. They're saying this. They're doing this. What do they do? They're asking me what to do. Like, what do I do? Like, I need a professional, And you kind of responded with those resources. And so I look at this as the place where people can be like, how do I handle this? What do I say? Here's resources, here's people, here's a network. I mean, that's really the goal. And you are just the first person that comes to mind with all of it because of what I think people have gathered. Like, yes, you're a clinician, you're a psychiatrist, you have a practice, but I don't know that they truly know like who you see and like what the goal is and where you're trying to take it. So you're up, your story now.
When I think about just the privilege of our lives overlapping and, weaving in the different ways that they have since middle school it's so rare and it's so valuable to me too. And so I think that, in all the ways that, my unique path has been a resource to you, I feel the same way, right, about you. And I think that's also just something to be grateful for. And I think that's something you and I both intentionally practice, like gratitude, and we express that to people that we care about. And I think that's why it's so important to you when you're thinking through, okay, well, how do I make this something accessible to other people? Because not everyone is like that. Not everyone is drawn to say like, I'm going to reach out to that person because it's the anniversary of something really sad in their life. But we can learn to be those people. And it doesn't mean we have to do it in a way that is uncomfortable to us. Like it can be in a lot of different ways. And so I just get really excited about this community taking shape and seeing what it becomes, because I know with you facilitating it, it's going to be fun and intentional. And who doesn't want to do something that's fun, right? So yeah, I'll speak very briefly to my life and kind of how I ended up doing what I do. But I went to the University of Florida and ended up studying nursing. And then in my first job as a nurse, I worked at the Veterans Hospital, and the best population ever to work with, truly just like a lot of fun. However, I realized there were a lot of deficits in access to care for veterans, exclusively mental health care. And then I really thought I wanted to work in acute care. So like hospital bedside. And then I thought, okay, the way you figure this out is you work in the ER. Then I worked in the ER, which was a revolving door of mental health crisis after mental health crisis. And so I took a leap of faith and went back to school, not to be an acute care nurse practitioner, but to be a psychiatric nurse practitioner, which, mind you, I was like flying blind because I'd never worked in psychiatry or anything. And so I'm just so grateful for that curiosity and that continuous questioning. Like, well, then how do you help people? Like, what actually makes a difference in healthcare? If in the ER, yes, the ER is helping people, but not sustainably, right? Like, it's like, we'll give you, we'll stop you bleeding. Right? Yeah. It's like, we'll stop your bleeding. We'll be here for you during your panic attack, but then we're going to send you back into whatever your life looks like. So then I worked in mental health care. My first job was outpatient. It was very overwhelming. And I had good support, but it was just very overwhelming. And from there, I went and worked inpatient pediatrics. And when I was working inpatient pediatrics and meeting children and adolescents after catastrophic life events or suicide attempts, and then hearing their stories leading up to it and thinking, why didn't you tell someone? It is totally normal to be depressed or sad or angry after your parents get divorced or after your boyfriend breaks up with you or failing a test. So all of these life experiences where these children were alone, quote unquote, in them and did not have the words or the skills to process. And so then they might internalize it or externalize it and require a psychiatric evaluation in the hospital. So that sparked in me an intense passion for preventative mental health care. And so that's what we do at Winings Wellness. We want to meet children and families before there's a crisis. We want to be neutral adults in children and adults' lives who get to know you and you have a relationship with, because we know every single person is going to go through life and have a stressor. And you might navigate that beautifully. You might not. You know what? You might be a parent and give birth to a child that you don't like. And we want to be a place where you can process that so that you don't take it out on your kid. And I don't say that in a blaming way or shaming way. I say that in a very fact-based way. Like, we don't get to choose the people that are in our family. And so we can develop skills and ways of coping with that. And no one is out there teaching us how to parent. You know, I can remember coming home with my son from the hospital and thinking like, that's it. Like they didn't talk to me at all. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like here is this thing that cries and needs you 24/7. And you're like, I'm also healing from birth. So
Mhm.
I, yeah, clinically, we want there to be more access to mental health care, and we want there to be more access to preventative mental health care. So that is our lens through which we practice. And then I teach. So there's a shortage of mental health care providers. Florida ranks 49th out of the 50 states and District of Columbia. 49th, you heard that correctly. And that number has been relatively stagnant since I trained. So that, depending on the data and what element of mental health you might hear is as great as 46. But we are
Oh, boy.
not doing well. Right. Like, is that what you want in your industry? Where you're like, we are the last. So it's not a
That's why
surprise
there's
that
so many like Florida Man Instagram accounts. And
I
like,
know.
people are crazy. It's
We're
crazy.
suffering.
There's our lack
We're
of mental health care.
suffering.
Okay.
Yeah. So I also teach at Jacksonville University, and I'm the director of the psychiatric nurse practitioner program there. Hopefully, my students are enjoying that, and I get to teach the family nurse practitioners their mental health content, which I really value about the way that's structured, and
That's awesome.
destigmatizing what it means to be in the primary care setting, because most people don't wake up and say, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to sign up for therapy, or like, I'm going to go see a psychiatrist. They go see primary care, or they're like, want to talk about their headaches or their tummy aches or whatever it might be. And genuinely, people are shocked when they find out, oh, those recurrent headaches are probably a symptom of anxiety or depression or unprocessed grief, So our brain is very, very capable of communicating with us in a variety of ways. And sometimes, if we aren't individuals who are tuned into our emotional experience, we will have physical symptoms that are a manifestation of an unprocessed emotional need.
Mhm.
So I want that to be normalized, that humans have feelings and that we're
What?
supposed to process them in safe and healthy ways. Yeah, and you're not supposed to be doing therapy like your whole entire life. That's the beautiful thing. I mean, you can if you want to. But what I mean by that is um carving out time in your life, whether that's, every other week, once a month, weekly, where you go and sit with someone and you just intentionally pause and you're like, how am I doing? And you let them walk you through some questions. That creates space in your heart and in your mind to live your life when you're not there. And it also helps compartmentalize, like you're saying, things pop up, nightmares, memories, just stressful moments. And if I don't have to give a lot of energy to that right now, because I'm going to talk about it with my therapist. It helps. And that's not to say like you're pushing it down or ignoring it, but it helps you live in your real life.
Yeah.
So anyways, those are my kind of professional endeavors. And yeah, anytime you're calling and you're like, what do you think about this? I'm like, let's do it. Like, why not?
And look
Let's
at
see what
us
happens.
doing it.
Doing
Doing
it.
it. 20 years, like, God, our 20-year anniversary is coming up. Have you planned it, or we
Yeah.
still got like
Yeah.
2 years, right?
We've got time.
We've got time.
Um,
Just put that on your
we do.
plate too.
If anyone listening to this graduated from Stanton in the class and would like to help
And you're like
plan,
school planning committee.
I'm going to start the committee. Let's start a committee.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, I so appreciate you being on board to kind of help me walk through this, and everybody else that'll hopefully join us. But I truly think, I think we both agree, like there's so much power in people knowing that they're not the only ones. And I
Yes.
will say, like, I semi hate like the mental health and suicide awareness months when they're just like, you're not alone, you're not alone, you're not alone. Because I don't hate it. I don't think people truly understand what that means. And they
Right.
just say it as a slogan, right? Like they say it as a
Yes.
marketing advertisement of like suicide. And I'm like, okay, so what are you doing to that,
Yeah.
to the important people in your life, to like make sure they know they're not alone, right? Like, are
Right.
you sitting there with them in their grief, like to show them they're not alone? Like, are you asking
Right.
them to stay around until the sun comes out? Like,
Hmm.
it's just, I think it's almost cliche now.
I think you're right. And I love Brene Brown's description of the difference in empathy and sympathy. So when somebody is going through something painful, especially emotionally painful.
Mhm.
That what they need is not someone to just stand. So there's this beautiful, and maybe we could link to this. There's a beautiful video that she has, and it's like a cartoon, and it's like someone is in a cave, like so. There's like a vertical element to this, and so somebody's sitting down in a cave, and there's someone else at the top yelling in, "You okay in there? Like you're good, right?" And so they're showing an element of like, "I'm here for you. I care for you." And
Mhm.
then the flip side of that is somebody climbing down the wall and just sitting and saying, "I'm here with you."
Yeah.
And like I have goosebumps just saying that because I think that's like my job and it makes me emotional and I don't get to be emotional in session. But I think that's
Yeah.
where I'm like, I'm here with you. Like,
Mhm.
that's my intent. And I think that's where you're taking something where you're like, I don't really like this slogan. So I'm gonna create something that's tangible. Because, for some people in their day-to-day life, they might not really feel known or loved, and that's painful. And so it's to say, you are still worth something. Your
Mhm.
grief still matters.
Yeah.
And you are not alone, truly. I mean, my life motto is never worry alone because that
Like
just
that.
leads to isolation. And that's not good. And then I do want to say one thing because I feel like I have to say it anytime we talk about suicidal thoughts or suicide. And that is that suicidal thoughts are a symptom of depression, and depression is a treatable mental illness. And so that's where, Jen and I have such a compassion for people who are living in that space and or have experienced somebody suffering from that. And that's kind of our rallying cry, like, hey, people are out there with this medical illness and they need access to care and they need people to be compassionate towards them.
Mhm.
And the more individuals that are equipped with that knowledge, this is a medical illness. This is something that is treatable. My body's responding in an appropriate way to stress or sadness. It doesn't mean that you just sit with that all by yourself. So I think,
Yeah.
unfortunately, our world hasn't really been kind to people who feel that way. And then that leads to more isolation and more self. What am I saying? Like where
Yeah.
something becomes embedded in your mind, like the belief it feels very real.
Yeah. They like internalize it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think yeah, it's a lot. I remember one of my therapy sessions, she when it was actually when I was explaining to her, like I was so hyped up and fired up for this, like for church. And
Yeah.
I was like, Jody, I could care less right now. Like the whole thing could just go to shit. I don't care. Like the LLC can lapse. Like I was like, I don't care. But like, it's bothering me that I don't care, but I just don't have it in me.
Hmm.
And it was that with a few other things. And I was just like, I'm numb. That's what I was just
Hmm.
numb. I feel nothing. And she was like, that's normal. Like that is, it's a defense mechanism. It's a brain response. It's all of these things. And I was like, well, like, do you think I'm depressed? And
Hmm.
she was like, no, I don't. She said, you have depressive symptoms,
Yes. There's a
but you're not
difference.
depressed. And I never knew the difference. But
Yeah.
I was worried almost about myself because I was like, okay, like, am I someone who's depressed now? Like, do I need to get help for depression? Like, granted, I'm talking to her and I would hope, if she thought I was depressed, she's going to take the steps to like get me what I need. But like,
Yes.
then I sit in those thoughts with myself of like, had I not been talking to her, would I have just like assumed I was
Mm-hmm.
depressed? And then I'm going to internalize that. And it's probably going to go down a really bad hill, right? Where
Hmm.
she's just saying, no, you're not. You know what? Like, here's what depression is. Here's the amount of time you need to have whatever she explains
Yeah.
to me, which you can explain. I'm not going to try to do it. But,
That's great.
um, and it was just knowing that like, oh, it was her validating me and saying, yeah, it's a depressive symptom. Like, it's a sad thing, but like, also like, why are we running from that symptom, right? Like, how about we
That's
feel
such a
it, we
good
process
question.
it.
Yeah. Like let's deal with it.
Yeah,
Like
let's deal with it
together
so that
in
it isn't
session so that it's
mhm.
not, yeah.
Let's bring it out. Let's handle it. Let's figure out how to package it up so you can like move
Yeah.
forward instead of sitting here in this thought and letting it grow and snowball and lead to other things to where you're telling yourself like I'm a depressed person.
Yeah. Oh,
And
and what power in the language we use towards ourselves, right? I'm
mhm,
feeling sad versus I'm a depressed person, two different messages.
yep. Yeah. Like just her validating me and say like, Jen, that's normal. Like I think something's wrong with you if you weren't feeling that way right now. If you were just like, let me get up on my horse and
Seriously.
go do this, I would be questioning a lot more than you saying like, I'm numb. I don't care about anything,
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, like I'm normal. It's okay. I'm going to get through this. Like that's what I
Right.
started to tell myself instead of like, oh God, am I now depressed?
But what beautiful internal dialogue to have for you to
Yeah.
be able to say like, I'm normal. I'm okay for whatever normal is. But I think if we were to ask people to get honest about what their internal dialogue is, most of us are not very nice to ourselves.
Yeah.
And that comes from somewhere. So that's messaging we've received, whether that's in our lived experience or from social media or what we're watching on TV. But I think that in and of itself is the power of therapy, is making meaning of things that are important to us and then where we choose to put our energy.
Sure.
And
And then,
I don't know that we know that's our choice. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that it's our choice what we think about, because a lot of our thoughts feel ingrained and automatic.
and out of our
But when we
control.
start out of our control, and when we start to sit and like create that little bit of space to go, oh, wait, what? I could like reflect on that differently. Anyways, that's a lot of sometimes I feel like I'm like inspiring matches in therapy with some of my loving patients, because I'm like, that's not real. Like that's just a thought in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I feel like that's why the work you do is so important. And we've already talked about access to that. But
Right.
I think, as you and I talked about, like if we can create a community
Mhm.
where people can be a resource for each other and
Mhm.
just really hammer that, like, we're all climbing that ladder down into the cave with whoever's down
Right.
there, right? Like, we're going to get you back on the ladder and you're going to climb out of it too.
Yep.
And we really could start something. I don't want it to sound, like dramatic or just like I'm up on, cloud nine dreams, but like, I think something that small can change the world as far as mental health goes, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, even just after sharing William's experience, the amount of people, I was shocked that just me being honest about the story and like, I've always been, I went to school for broadcast journalism and veered left out of that.
Here you are.
Look at me full circle and I didn't even realize it.
Woo! Broadcasting live.
I
House of
found
Hall.
my niche in there, and stupid news stories about dogs biting people wasn't cutting it for me.
Yeah. No, thank you.
But I've always been a writer. I had a blog for a long time. I still have the blog. I've not kept up with it because 85 kids later, I just, let that go. But
Children, chickens.
writing has always been a form of therapy for me. Like
Mhm.
it's a cathartic release. It's putting my thoughts on paper helps. I mean, even if I'm mad at my husband, right? Like I'll sit there and go in my notes and like write every reason I'm mad at him and how he pissed me off and what he did. And I'll sit on it and I'll reread it and I'll be like, I feel a little bit better. Maybe I don't need to send it. Like just
Mm.
getting our thoughts out
Yeah.
there for just some sort of like validation and release. Like it's huge. I don't even know where I was going with this, but really just sharing the story of William, the amount of people that personally reached out and they're like, hey,
Oh, I
your
was
story
shocked
helped
because
me.
I mean, just the number of times you would say, I'm not sure, what should I say to this person or what resource should I get? I'm like, Jen, how many of these calls do you get a day, or like texts or messages?
And it's wild.
And the capacity you have to care is unique. But I also think some of that can be facilitated for other people. And I honestly think most people do care. They're just scared. Like, I
Yeah.
don't want to make something worse. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I think that's where, first of all, asking someone how they feel is never going to make something worse, because when we move something from the limbic or emotional system in our brain to our cognitive mind, our words and our language and our thoughts, then we have a chance to hear it differently or maybe view it differently. And, there's a lot of nuances to that. But it is just important to know talking to people about how they feel is not going to be a risk factor for something bad happening. And that's a lot of what I'm dismantling with my family nurse practitioners, because their biggest fear is, if I ask someone if they're suicidal and they say yes, what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the answer is, you just stay present. You
Yeah.
thank them for telling you, thank you for being honest with me.
Yeah.
That is a symptom. That is a treatable symptom of depression. let's get some resources for you, right? And there's a difference of someone who's acutely suicidal, and we might need them to be in a safe environment where we would say, hey, why don't we like let someone know that's going to be
Yeah,
able to help you? Like a friend is supposed to be a friend, a healthcare provider is supposed to be a healthcare provider. So I think
absolutely.
those are the big differences of saying we have these
We can
phenomenal
support, we
resources.
don't have to cure.
Yes. No, yeah, absolutely not. No, the
Yeah.
expectation is not to step into a scope of practice or a role that you're not equipped for. That's not the expectation.
Yeah.
But knowing things, right? Like the crisis text line exists and it's free
Mhm.
and you can literally text them anytime. 741 741. You text the word life. You're immediately connected with a crisis counselor. Suicide Lifeline is now 3-digit 988, which is awesome because for a very long time it was a long number you had to dial, and
You
now
would
you can
never remember. Yeah.
call or text. So, even those elements of just having them programmed in your phone so that you can share the contact with people. I will say if you use them and then you stop responding, the police do come to your house to check on you. So I don't want that to ever startle someone. As
Spoiler
someone who
alert.
works with adolescents, and I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm so proud of you for using this resource. Why did you turn your phone off? Because they felt better after, hearing from someone, which
Yeah,
is wonderful. But then that was also like a startling thing. So now I also
just
caveat,
saying.
if you use this resource, people are going to make sure you're okay.
Yeah. But I mean,
Like
that's great that that's even a thing,
free and
especially
national.
and if what I feel like, and I don't know if you see that, I feel like a lot of the noise I hear right now is like we don't have enough providers, we don't have people that can help. And I feel like that's a
Mhm.
message that's getting sent out. So to think like, dude, you can text this number and someone can help you immediately. So like, why are we
Yes.
out here thinking there's no one that's going to help you? Like, there's
Right.
people that can help you, you know?
Yes.
Um, but yeah, just living in that and like people, hey, I was suicidal, my husband, my kid, like all these things that just come out of the woodworks. And you're like, what? And I
Yeah.
mean, part of me, there were definitely moods I'd get in where I'm like, I don't want to know. Like, I,
Mm-hmm.
oof, like this is a lot for me right now. Like I'm grieving and I can't bring your grief into this space too. But then when I was able to kind of like process some of that and look at it as like, dude, like the amount of people that just suffer in silence because they
Hmm.
don't think anyone can relate is, I think that's where it goes bad, you know? Like,
Hmm.
how do we give these people a place, like even those introverts that don't want to talk, that may be part of this group and they're never really going to say anything, but you know what? Hopefully
Yeah.
they're taking something away from it, right? Like
Right.
you don't need to contribute, but like
Mm-mm.
take it, take
Yeah.
whatever you need to internalize and in a positive way or whatever resources you can pull from it. And like, that's what we're doing here, right? Like
Yeah.
that's all we can really ask for.
Right.
So
Yeah.
man, we
Yeah.
are good at talking, if nothing else, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Put a microphone in front of me. Yeah.
I'll go for
I'm
days.
excited. I think
So
I think you're onto something. Well, you just say briefly, and you can say as much as you want, but I'm thinking briefly, like when, because we're saying create this, like make this space. So can you speak to this vision for what you've created for House of Halls? So the
yeah,
community platform and kind of what you're hopeful that people will participate in.
yeah. So we basically have. I found an online platform that is just kind of like an all-in-one that so excited me because this is when I called Liz and I was like, "What's going on over here?" Anyways, this is when I called Liz and I was like, "Dude, I found the vehicle, right? Like, it was
Yeah.
going to be so many things to piece together. Like, we have this message. Yeah, we could talk about it. How do we really bring people in a space?" I'm like, I'm not going to do like a Facebook page, right? But how do we do it? And so I found this platform and it's essentially like a classroom that you kind of join. There's an app on your phone. You literally join our classroom. So there's a link. I'll put it on here. It'll be all over our social media. Like Liz and I will both promote it for anybody. You guys can send it to friends, whatever
Great.
it is. But really, what's hosted in that platform is a community, a private community that truly is just meant for people either there might be some providers in there, but then there's really the members of the group. It's you've experienced loss in any fashion, right? And
Right. Yeah. It
any
doesn't have to be catastrophic,
yeah,
where I think that was one of your big hesitations. You're like, I don't know what I want to say because my loss is substantial. I wouldn't want somebody to think, well, my loss isn't murder or suicide.
mhm,
It Loss is loss. and grief is grief. And so there's no tier or status or element. This is meant to be community for people to come together and not feel alone as they're getting back to living and or thriving. Because I think that's where you're at, where you're, 3.5 years through a substantial loss, and realizing how to purpose it in a way that you get to continue to have therapeutic grief and honor, what you've been through.
Yeah. And I guess I just really see the platform as that place of like, look, maybe you just meet somebody on there that's been through something very similar that like they can connect off to the side and like move forward.
Sure.
And, maybe they find a counseling resource in there. Maybe like I would have never found my therapist without you and another one of my friends that were just sending me resources, right? Like I called all of them. And funny story,
Right.
I wasn't calling them for me. I was calling them for my mom. I was calling
I
them for my
remember.
brother. I was like, y'all need help, right? Like I don't need help. Y'all need
I'm
help.
fine. I'm just gonna go pick up some ashes and
right. And like I was the first one to start therapy and like the last one to continue doing it. But it was in those phone calls, one of the therapists, she clicked with me, right? And I think that's another thing important for people. Like you may have tried therapy, or if you're looking at it, you might find a therapist and like think therapy sucks just because like that's not
Yes, that's such a good point. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And they're like, I tried it, didn't work. And I'm like, no, you need somebody else. Like
you didn't have the right person.
With like the most amazing person up front. And it's super wild. I don't know if I ever told you this. I talked to her about Chirp when I was telling her that stuff. And she didn't tell me for several sessions, but we were just kind of like joking around one day about something else random. And she was like, so what I wanted to tell you, like not on a therapeutic standpoint, but like 75% of my practice is serving trafficked youth.
That's insane. You cannot make this stuff up.
Right? Like God didn't put her in my path because for no reason, right? Like that is not a coincidence. Like that is wild to me. I want to say maybe a total of 7 counselors. It was 5 to 7. Right. For some reason, she was the one that I was like, I want to talk to.
You're my girl.
That's who I want to talk to. My family might not want to, but I do. We all went to her for a little while, which I think was kind of cool too, because she saw different perspectives. Anyway, that's who I went with. And like, it was just life changing for me. Like it really was. But I also know that I have friends that have been like, I've gone through like 4 therapists. They all suck. And I'm like, keep going, like you'll find someone. So, but back to your question of like, I just hope this platform can be a resource where like people can recommend like, hey, here's where I went. Right. Here's what I did. Like you and I are going to have some sessions in there, a lot of Q&A, hopefully some more like community activity stuff where people can hop on. We'll have to obviously keep it limited, but if we, if it grows enough, we would get to the point where people can kind of get that like platform to speak their story and find a way to heal from it. Even if they don't go through maybe your traditional like therapy sessions, but it's really just a place that I want people to know there's other people going through, because I think I had never known anyone that lost somebody to suicide until I opened up and said, I lost somebody to suicide. And then boom, 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 boom. Holy shit. Why is there so many? You know? So it's like, how do I open a place where somebody else can come in and be like, hey, I lost a baby at 22 weeks. Oh, shoot. So did I. Cool. Mm-hmm. You guys need to talk this through, because you can relate. And I'm not expecting that 700 people are going to come in and relate to my story and be like, yeah, that should happen to me too. That might not be the case, but like at the end of the day.
Go ahead.
You're good.
I was just thinking, even just the element of your story where, yes, you lost your dad when you were 9 years old, but you didn't get closure until you were an adult. And I think that's another complex grief that people don't know how to articulate. Like, I don't understand why I'm so frustrated or sad about this. Well, if the trauma hasn't ended, or there are elements that are unresolved, it's okay if you are still walking some days in a lot of uncertainty or in a lot of grief or in a lot of emotion. And I think, those elements, we don't know who that relates to or whose story that's meaningful to. So anyways, I think that's a substantial one where I'm like, we don't know. We don't know what, like to your point, like you were drawn to your therapist for a specific reason. And then you come to find out like all of these things that you have in common. I feel that way about my therapist, and she retired, and I was like, was it me? I'm just kidding.
You did her in.
Was it too much? No, but it's such a gift. And and a unique relationship that you develop where you're like, man, you helped weave the fabric of who I am. And yeah, if you don't have that experience with a therapist, my hope for you is that you would find someone or that you would be willing to try again, because when it's good and when it's right, it's profound. And that's not to say like every single session is magical or, like they become your friend, they should not become your friend. That's not therapy. But that's where this community can be different, where, like, yes, you
Yeah.
might find a therapy resource, but you also might find a friend.
Yeah.
And
And I
yeah.
think, when I kind of look at the people around me, like one of my kind of that close knit group I have here in Orlando, they've also lost people, like, so they
Mm,
get it. And that might be a big part of it. But again, like God didn't put them on the path for no reason, right? Like one of them lost a
right.
mom, one of them lost a dad. But like one of them's lost a kid. Like
Ugh.
they've gone through loss, like they get it, right? And
Yeah.
I think people that have gone through something are there for people in a different way. I think it gives you a newfound perspective. I think you stop taking as many things for granted. Like I think there's honestly a lot of lessons, positive, great lessons you learn from loss and going through grief and just
Mhm.
navigating that. And even no matter how long your losses were ago, like there's always a stage that like there's no timeline where you should be
Right.
over something. It doesn't
Mm-mm.
matter if it's been 2 days, 2 years, 20 years. But
Right.
I'm now entering. So Chris and I went on our anniversary trip a few weeks ago. And Thursday before it was a memorial service for all the Polk County officers that had died. And we had gone on the top of conversation and he brought up like that Kenzie's almost the age that I was when my dad died.
Mm. Right.
And I'm like, whoa, like I'm now reliving it in that way, right? Like not only
Yeah.
I now have to parent, like I think that's a big thing too. Like we now have this whole other generation that we have to explain these things to. Like
Yeah.
Kenzie doesn't know William committed suicide. She asked, she had, I want to say not even a month ago, 2 weeks straight, she cried every night at bedtime, I miss William.
Yeah.
And I've called you before. I'm like, what do I need to do? And like, kind of just like detecting things within my kids of like,
Right.
I worry about those things now too. I'm like, how do I keep my kids? Like, how do I know if they're okay? How do I make sure they're okay? What if they become suicidal? Like, at what point do I introduce this idea of suicide to them? Because I also don't want them to like learn that they could do that. And, just so many things that I think so many
Right.
people in this community are also going to question and be like, yeah,
Absolutely.
like, how do I parent through this? Like,
Right.
I, when I say like the gratitude thing, like I never take for granted when Chris drives back down that driveway at night and he just went to work, right? But my dad just went to work. And not
Yeah.
that, Chris is not necessarily like in an as risky industry, but
But
he can get
still,
in a car accident. But
don't
him
know.
coming home, like their
Yeah.
dad walking through the door every night is something I will never, ever, ever take for granted because it's something that was taken from me,
Yeah.
So I just think people in their grief have so much
Mhm.
to share, to acknowledge, to still navigate through. And that's just it's super important. And it's, if you were to ask me before we started this, like, okay, where do they go? Where do they go? Like they call a
Yeah.
therapist. I don't
Right.
know. They,
Yeah.
but it's like, okay, so let's create this landing pad, right? And
Yeah.
they can come here and then we
Yeah.
can figure out where you go.
Right.
So yeah, I just really want it to be a place where they can maybe like hear some other experiences, hear how people are navigating things, like how are they finding happiness, how are they finding success, how are they moving forward with their lives, whatever that looks like for them, like whatever their goal or their dream is, like how do they do it while they navigate life in a way they didn't think they would have to.
Right.
Um, and how do we create that space? And so I
Right.
envision it just being through video, through, even like I would love to create, challenges like gratitude challenges and just
Mhm.
different things that we can like acknowledge in a small portion that are just going to be building blocks
Yeah.
for navigating grief, which when I say that, like it never ends, right? Like there's
Right.
not an end to your grief. There
Right.
might be high points and low points, but like it doesn't just go away.
It doesn't go away. Yeah. And I think as you're talking, I wonder if you realize how resilient you are and how much you repurpose painful things, because just thinking just that statement of I'll never take it for granted that my husband, that their dad comes home at night because that was taken from me. Like
Yeah.
that's really profound. And I can imagine, sometimes I'm listening to podcasts and I have to pause them because I'm like, Like that's not small. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'm grateful that you choose to welcome people into your grief in a way that is tangible and to say, I'm not left there. Like, yes, that's very painful, but I
Yeah.
choose gratitude and I choose to find meaning and purpose. Um, and that takes time. I think for many people, they don't know what to, like, okay, that sounds good to me. What do I like? How do I do that? Because I don't feel like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the other piece where I get so excited where I'm like, yeah, let's just get started and let's just welcome people into a private community where they can, take in some information or maybe digest or maybe just reflect for the first time in a long time on where are they able to choose gratitude or where are they able to feel that is a safe place for them.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And then they may be able to create some concrete steps forward.
For sure. That's the goal here. So
That's the goal.
we'll see how it goes. To the moon, right?
To the moon.
The moon. All right. Well, thank you. I so appreciate your time. I'm
Yes.
super excited to, I don't know, just see where this goes and see how we can help. And I also think that this can pivot. It might, one of the things you told me, I was talking to Liz when I was like, all right, I've reframed this idea already, what, 4 times probably?
Yeah.
And
There's a
one
few.
of the very first things I told you was I don't want it to be limited to people for life after loss.
Mhm.
And I don't want that. Like, I don't want to back myself into that corner. I don't want it to only be like, there's other people that grieve
Yeah.
things and it's like, but there's also a ton that grieve this and I can relate so specifically. So I told you I didn't want to do that. And you were like, oh, so supportive. And then I came back and I was like, look, Chris talked to me. I do want to do this.
I do.
Yes, as you should,
Yeah.
and it's already pivoted. And I think I'm also just such a perfectionist and I'm like, okay, I have to figure out XYZ. Like, how do I serve these people? Like, how do I fix this problem? How do I give them value? Like, how do I make it better? And I think at the end of the day, I was like, what do I tell everybody else when I'm doing like business consulting or anything? You got to start. Hey, do something. And maybe your
Right.
master plan changes,
Right.
but you didn't waste time because you still needed to go through that step to get where you're going to go. Right. So
Yes.
who knows what it'll end up being. My prayer is that it becomes something bigger than I ever imagined, right? Like
Mm.
that's all I could hope for. But all I know is we can start taking action and take small actions. And I think as we grow this community and see where the need is and like what's helping, maybe what's not as helpful, like we pivot
Oh,
toward
yeah.
help.
Feedback. Seeing what's happening. Yeah.
That's my
Absolutely.
life. 4 small kids. I pivot. That's all I do all day long. I'm a professional pivoter.
Pivot.
I'm going to put the little friends couch emoji
Yes.
on. If I figure out how to use this technology, I'll do it.
Yeah. Every episode, there's going to be so many cool things that you learn.
Listen, it's going to take us, hopefully we'll keep them to an hour, but like, it's going to take us like 2 hours to record. And then it's going to take me like
Yes.
20 to edit. So I'm just never going to post them because I'm just gonna be like, well, I haven't put that GIF up yet.
Post them. You can always go back and add links.
Let me go delete that later.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah,
But
so
I'm
thank
so
you. Yeah,
grateful to
I'm
be a part of
grateful
this.
for
Thank
you
you.
being in this space with me and really being my like driving force to be like, yes, like, and doing this alongside of me, it makes it less scary. And I told you one of my concerns is like, kind of like I've mentioned, like, I don't want people to come to me thinking I'm some like clinician all I can do is like share my story, share my experiences and share maybe my coping mechanisms and like tools I've learned. But like,
Yeah.
that's, where I really lean to you. And like I told you, like, I didn't get through this alone. I got through it with people like you and friends and family. And so, just want to provide that space for other people that might not have it. So
Let's do it. Yeah.
let's do it. All right. Till next time.
Till next time. Thanks for being here, everyone who joined us, wherever you are.
Yes. Thank you so much. Super excited.